Did you know that if you have a date in Constantinople, they'll be meeting you in Istanbul? And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, then check out the song by It Might Be Giants that I'll put in the playlist. Alrighty, so remember we talked about the fall of Rome. Rome fell in part, and for a number of reasons, but in part because the center of Rome was now in Byzantium. It was now in Constantinople. That Constantine had moved a lot of the government to Constantinople, and so when the western part, when Rome fell, Constantinople just kind of backed off and let it happen so that it could stay strong. And so that will become the Byzantine Empire. So I like to think of it kind of as Rome 2.0, because the Byzantine Empire shares a lot of similarities with the Roman Empire. Both are going to have similar law codes. The 12 tables that was used in Rome is going to influence Emperor Justinian when he writes his Justinian Code, which we'll talk about a little more later on. Both are going to have similar religions. They're both going to be Christian, though we're going to have a split in Christianity, and again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. They both use similar styles in architecture, and in both of their militaries, they use the people they conquer, they incorporate them into the military, which you would think that after the Byzantine Empire saw what good that did to the Roman Empire, they would stop, but, who listens to me? Alrighty, let's look at the Byzantine Empire a little bit before we get into Justinian, who's going to be our main emperor in the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire's government is going to be an emperor with a council of nobles. They will have a bureaucracy, so remember a top-down system that we've talked about before. And politics in the Byzantine Empire are going to be mixed a little bit with sports, which is very dangerous, or at least it sounds dangerous to me. It was very much a part of everyday life in the Byzantine Empire. You had two main sides, the blues and the greens, that would compete against each other, but also had political stuff against each other. And a lot of sports were performed or done in something called the Hippodrome, which is very similar to a Colosseum, but it was huge. I mean, you could fit a lot of people in the Hippodrome. Much like our Swahili states, the Byzantine Empire, especially Constantinople, was very much into trade. They were very cosmopolitan along the Silk Road. And so you had a lot of different people of different types of cultures in Constantinople. It's a big center of trade, and it's going to make the Byzantine Empire very wealthy because of that. And Constantinople is a center of trade because of its location, because of its geography. This geography will one day, however, lead to its downfall, as other people would also like to have that spot in order to gain wealth. Let's talk about Justinian for a second. He's probably going to be the most important emperor in the Byzantine Empire. He's going to do a lot for the Byzantine Empire. Again, he's going to take the Roman law code, the 12 tables, and use parts of it in his own law code called the Justinian Code, because we're not self-centered or anything, or we don't like to praise ourselves. He's going to rebuild Constantinople and make it into this great city. However, he's going to do it through high taxes, which is going to lead to some social problems. Justinian is going to marry a prostitute named Theodora, and I am not making this up. And Theodora is going to be like his top advisor. And she is going to do a lot of good for women in the Byzantine Empire, especially for women prostitutes, giving prostitutes more rights. One building in particular that Justinian built, or had built, that has stood the test of time is known as the Hagia Sophia. It is this gorgeous church in Constantinople, and it will one day be turned into a mosque after the Turks invade. And there's going to be a lot of controversy and a lot of hurt feelings, because when the Muslims come in, they're going to cover up a lot of the great pictures of Christian symbols, of Christian stories that are in the Hagia Sophia. And so I know that today it's more of a museum you can go and walk through, and there has been work done to restore those original paintings. I will also put a video about the Hagia Sophia in this playlist. Justinian had ambitions to expand the Byzantine Empire, and these ambitions are going to weaken the Byzantine Empire. Remember, we talked about that even great empires, if they expand out too far, they can't necessarily control them, and that will weaken them. Alrighty, let's talk about the church for a second. Remember that we have one main church at this time, which was in Rome, and now is in Constantinople. Well, because the empire is split in two, and it's kind of ruled in two different ways, you have two different types of churches that emerge, and two different ways of doing things. They're both Christian, they both believe that Jesus is the Son of God, but they differ on a few major points. One is the use of icons, which are paintings, the value of these icons. Another is communion, if there should be yeast or not should be yeast in the bread used in communion. Another is the power of the Pope, if he should be over kings like we have in Rome, or under them like we will have in the Byzantine Empire. And so we're going to have lots of arguments between the two sides, and eventually we have a Pope on one side and a Patriarch on the other, which is kind of the Byzantine's version of Pope. And they will excommunicate each other. And so that is known as the Great Schism. We have a split in the church. And so on one side you have the Roman Catholic Church, and on the other you have the Byzantine Orthodox Church. On the Roman Catholic side, we're going to see that the Pope does have authority over the kings, in the sense that the kings get their blessings from heaven through the Pope. Whenever a king is crowned, it is the Pope that puts the crown on the king's head, symbolizing the power he has over them. In the Byzantine Empire, it's the opposite. It is the emperor who is over the patriarch, or Caesaropapism, Caesar over Pope. And so the power is in the government more so than in the church. We will see outside pressures that want to come in and invade the Byzantine Empire. The strongest is probably the Arabs, and the Byzantine Empire is able to defeat, or at least push back, the Arabs with something called Greek fire. And I like to think that it was the inspiration for wildfire that's used in Game of Thrones. Just highly effective. However, these constant battles between the Byzantines and the Arabs are going to weaken farmers. They're going to have a lot of bad crops because of all this fighting going around near them. And so that's going to lead to some internal revolts. So the Byzantine Empire is going to decline because of the Great Schism that separates them from Western Europe. The Crusades, because the Western Europeans come in and attack them. And the Turks are going to come invade and establish what will become the Ottoman Empire. And they will rename Constantinople to Istanbul. And that is what it is still called today. I'll see you next time.